This is a story of ancient human migration, of the lost civilizations of the Americas, and of the events that completely changed the world in the 15th century. Our Earth has experienced 5 major ice ages, and the last of them, which was at its peak about 20,000 to 25,000 years ago, was a time when a large part of the Earth was buried under thick sheets of ice, and sea levels had dropped by several hundred feet.
During this same ice age, an astonishing event occurred that left a deep impact on human history. This event was the entry of humans into the continent of America. The question arises, how did humans reach America at that time? What we today call the Bering Strait, the sea that separates Asia, Siberia, and North America, Alaska, was not a sea at that time, but a massive land bridge. It was called Beringia. Due to the intense cold of the Ice Age, much of the world's water was frozen in glaciers and ice sheets. As a result, the sea level dropped 300 to 400 feet lower than today, thus opening a vast, dry passage between the two continents. This was not a narrow strip, but an entire region that was hundreds of kilometers wide. This land bridge was covered with grass and tundra vegetation, and for this reason, the large animals of that time such as mammoths, mastodons, and bison roamed this area in search of food. In pursuit of these animals for hunting, small groups of humans also entered this new and completely unknown territory from Siberia, having no idea that they were stepping onto a new continent. They unknowingly entered this new world and then gradually spread southward.
About 11,000 years ago, the last ice age began to end. The world's temperature rose, glaciers started to melt, and the sea level began to rise again. As a result, that land bridge, Beringia, gradually submerged underwater and the Bering Strait came into existence once more. Thus, the land connection between the Old World and the New World was completely severed. Even today, at the narrowest point of the Bering Strait, the distance between Asia and America is only 85 kilometers. But after this land bridge sank, it took the people of the Old World about 10,500 years to cross this 85-kilometer sea distance again.
It is strange to think that two worlds so close remained completely unaware of each other for such a long period. This is the most important aspect of this separation. During this long period, the early humans who entered the New World formed their own completely unique civilizations, languages, cultures, and social structures. They flourished for thousands of years without any external interference. During these thousands of years of separation, two types of populations developed there. On one hand, countless native tribes known as Native American tribes were spread from the icy plains of Canada to the forests and mountains of South America.
They mostly lived in small villages or tribes, and their economy was based on hunting, fishing, and agriculture. Maize was their staple food and an important part of their culture. But alongside this, some great and complex civilizations also emerged in the New World that could rival many civilizations of the Old World in their grandeur and advancement. Among them, 3 civilizations were particularly important. The first was the Aztec Empire, established in the region of present-day Mexico. Its center was the great city of Tenochtitlan, which was built on islands in the middle of a lake and is considered a masterpiece of engineering. This empire was known for its military power, extensive trade network, and complex religious rituals. Its area was more than 200,000 square kilometers, and it included about 500 smaller states, with a total estimated population of around 6 million. Second, to the south of the Aztecs in Central America were the cities of the Maya civilization. The Maya civilization was much older than the Aztec, about 4,000 years old. Although by the time of Columbus, the great cities of the classic Maya period had fallen into decline, the Maya people still existed and their culture was alive.
They were very famous for their calculations, mathematics, astronomy, their calendar, and their writing system, hieroglyphs. The third great civilization was in the Andean mountain range of South America, known as the Inca Empire. It was one of the largest empires in history, stretching from Ecuador in the north to Chile and Argentina in the south. The Inca were famous for their organized government, extensive road system, magnificent buildings built on mountains like Machu Picchu, and a population of over 12 million. This means the New World was not a desolate place, but home to millions of people.
But the most astonishing thing was that these millions of people, with their great civilizations and settlements, were completely unaware of the millions living in the Old World, that is, Europe, Asia, and Africa. And those people were also unaware of them. For thousands of years, these two human worlds revolved in their own orbits like separate planets. It was an experiment in human isolation unparalleled in history. Here, some people raised the question, was there really no contact during this long period? Did no one arrive there before Columbus? Some such claims, stories, and controversial pieces of evidence are indeed found. In Chinese poetry from 1700 years ago, there was a mention of a mysterious land called Fusang, located far to the east of China. Some people speculate that this might be a reference to America. Then, in the 5th century AD, an Afghan Buddhist monk named Huishan is said to have crossed the Pacific and spent 40 years in Fusang. But concrete historical or archaeological evidence for these stories is virtually non-existent. Similarly, some Muslim historians have mentioned that during the Umayyad period in Spain, some Muslim sailors ventured into the Atlantic Ocean, and some Hindus believe the people from ancient India reached America.
They argue this based on similarities between some Native American cultures and Hindu traditions. However, all these claims are mere speculation due to a lack of evidence. They have not been proven by any scientific or historical research. These are merely ideas based on beliefs and wishes that are far from reality. It is true that such stories generate interest among people, but to consider them as facts and a part of history is a serious mistake. However, the most solid and accepted evidence is that of the Vikings from Northern Europe, around 1000 AD,
and reached the coast of North America. They called this place Vinland, which is likely the area of modern-day Newfoundland, Canada. There they also established a small settlement, the remains of which still exist today. There is no doubt that the Vikings reached there, but their settlement could not last for more than a few decades. For one, they had ongoing clashes with the local tribes, and second, they were very far from Europe, which made managing supplies and reinforcements.
But the rest of Europe did not learn of this discovery, nor was any permanent contact established. Thus, these events were like throwing a pebble into the ocean. Ripples were created but disappeared before reaching the shore. That 1,000-year separation was a solid reality that remained until the 15th century. On the maps of both worlds, the other world simply did not exist. And then, what happened in the 15th century that brought down this 1,000-year-old wall? This century was a period of great crisis and change for Europe. To understand this change, we need to go back a little, to look at the rise and fall of the Roman Empire.
For centuries, the Roman Empire was the greatest power in Europe, but over time it weakened, and eventually only the Eastern Roman Empire, known as the Byzantine Empire, remained. By the 15th century, even this great empire had shrunk to just its capital, Constantinople, and a few surrounding areas. Constantinople, which is Istanbul today, was not only the center of the Byzantine Empire, but also an extremely important strategic and spiritual center for Europe. It was the heart of Eastern Orthodox Christianity, a major trading hub, and considered Europe's gateway to Asia. But then in 1453, a young Ottoman Turkish Sultan, Mehmed the
This conquest shook Europe to its core. It had two immense and devastating effects. The first was spiritual and psychological. The fall of Constantinople was a huge shock for Europe. They felt that Christianity was retreating and Islam was advancing. The last remnant of the centuries-old Roman Empire was erased. The famous church, Hagia Sophia, was converted into a mosque. This sent a wave of despair and fear throughout Europe that their civilization was in danger. The second was the economic impact. For centuries, Constantinople and its territory—
Silk, spices, gold, silver, and other precious goods from China and India reached Europe through this route. After the Ottoman conquest, this profitable trade largely stopped or was subjected to very heavy taxes, which dealt a severe blow to the European economy. The closure of this trade route led to a rapid spread of unemployment and poverty in many European cities. There were shortages of food, farmers fell into debt, and crime in the cities increased to dangerous levels. This economic distress and
This situation made European rulers and merchants very anxious to find an alternative route. Now their eyes were again on the east, especially China and Japan. At that time, Marco Polo's travelogue, written about 150 years earlier, was very popular in Europe. Marco Polo had written such stories about the wealth of China, which he called Cathay, and Japan, or Supangu, especially of its gold, that it ignited the imaginations of Europeans. He wrote that the roofs and floors of the Japanese imperial palace were made of gold, and that the wealth of the Mongol ruler of China, Kublai Khan, was incalculable.
For a poverty-stricken Europe, these stories were like a key to a treasure chest. Everyone wanted to reach this wealth to change Europe's fortunes. The problem was how to get there. The land route had become very difficult and expensive after the fall of Constantinople. The Mediterranean route, which passed through Egypt, was controlled by the Mamluks, a powerful Muslim empire. The Portuguese sailor Bartholomew Dias had opened a sea route by reaching the Cape of Good Hope at the southern tip of Africa in 1488, but it was a very long, dangerous, and time-consuming journey. Thus, Europe was in a bind, and it desperately needed a new, shorter, and safer route.
And in this state of desperation and need, a man came forward who had a completely new, revolutionary, and for that time seemingly impossible plan. His name was Christopher Columbus. He was an experienced sailor from the Italian city of Genoa who had spent his whole life at sea. He was greatly influenced by Marco Polo's stories and was convinced that the Earth was round. Educated people of that era were familiar with this concept, but Columbus turned this concept into a practical plan. His theory was simple yet very bold. He believed that since the Earth is round, if one travels straight west from Europe, one could cross the Atlantic Ocean and reach Asia, especially Japan and China.
It was possible to reach the east by going west.
He calculated that this distance would be only 4,500 kilometers, which was much shorter than the route around Africa, and most importantly, this route was not under the control of any Muslim power, meaning it was also safe. In fact, Columbus's estimate was completely wrong. He had greatly underestimated the size of the Earth, and he also did not know that an entire continent existed between Europe and Asia. In reality, the distance was much greater than his estimate, and his destination was not Japan but a whole new world. But at that time, Columbus was completely confident.
His ambitions were not only financial, he was also filled with a deep religious passion. He considered himself the Christ bearer. There is a famous Christian story in which St. Christopher carried Jesus across a river. Columbus believed that God had chosen him for the task of discovering new worlds for Christianity, converting the people there to Christianity, and helping to restore the prestige of Christianity that had been tarnished after the fall of Constantinople. He dreamed of a new great Christian empire. He went to the rulers of Portugal, England, and Italy, but he was met with disappointment everywhere. The rulers were either unwilling to spend due to Europe's poor economic condition, or their advisors considered Columbus's calculations to be incorrect. Finally, after years of struggle, he arrived in Spain in 1485, where King Ferdinand II and Queen Isabella I ruled jointly. But even here, he did not find immediate success. Spain was at a very important juncture in its history. It was in the final stages of the long war, Reconquista, to eliminate the last vestiges of Muslim rule in Granada.
All the attention of the king and queen was on this war. Columbus had to wait for about 7 years, but he did not lose hope. Finally, in January 1492, when Granada was conquered and centuries of Muslim rule in Spain ended, Queen Isabella, who was filled with euphoria of victory and religious zeal, agreed to meet Columbus. Columbus skillfully presented his plan to the queen. He not only promised immense wealth for Spain, that is, the gold
to reach the non-Christian lands of Asia, convert millions of people there to Christianity, and spread the glory of Spain and the greatness of Christianity throughout the world. Queen Isabella, under the influence of both the lure of wealth and religious fervor, decided to sponsor the voyage. She gave Columbus 3 ships and a crew and promised to make him admiral of the ocean sea and governor of any lands he discovered. This was a huge success for Columbus, but there is also a dark side of this story. To achieve his goal and keep his crew with him, Columbus deliberately gave false information about the distance and direction during the voyage.
This was a deception that not only endangered the success of his plan, but also put the lives of all the people who went with him at risk. Still, he did it because he did not want to back down from his goal one bit. Thus, after thousands of years of separation, the crises and desires of the 15th century pushed Europe westward. Hopes were now pinned on this bold, yet based on miscalculations and possibly deception, plan of Christopher Columbus. The stage was set for an encounter that was about to change the world forever.
When Columbus's eyes finally saw land and he disembarked there, what kind of world did he encounter? Was it really the Asia he had pictured in his mind, or did he face a new world that was completely different from all of his imaginations and, instead of fulfilling his dreams, was about to write a completely new history? This was the beginning of a new era, which changed the destiny of both the Old World and the New World forever. We will tell you all of this in the next episode of the History of America.